I always thought my house was just like any other. Old, a little creaky, but full of charm. It wasn't until I decided to spend a quiet weekend alone that I realized just how unsettling isolation can be. The first night was uneventful, save for the occasional groan of the wooden floors contracting in the cool night air. But on the second night, things changed. I was reading in the living room, the clock nearing midnight, when I heard a distinct thump coming from the attic. My initial reaction was to dismiss it as the house settling. Yet, as I continued to read, the noise persisted. Thump, thump, thump. Each one louder and more deliberate than the last. Summoning all my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the attic door. The stairs creaked ominously under my weight. I pushed open the attic door, the hinges whining in protest. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing dusty boxes and cobwebs, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to turn back when I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a set of footprints in the dust, leading from the window to the corner of the attic. I followed the trail cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the corner, my flashlight flickered, then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the flashlight, shaking it until the light sputtered back on. When it did, I saw him. A shadowy figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing just a few feet away. His eyes were a sickly yellow, glowing with a malevolent light. I stumbled backward, tripping over a box and falling to the floor. The figure moved closer, silent and menacing. In a desperate attempt to defend myself, I grabbed an old, rusty wrench from a nearby toolbox and swung it wildly. The figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, leaving me alone and breathless in the dim light. I raced down the stairs and locked the attic door behind me, my hands trembling. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my room, every creak and groan of the house amplified by my fear. When morning finally came, I called a locksmith to change every lock in the house and had the attic door reinforced with heavy bolts. I never told anyone about what happened that night. Even now, years later, I avoid the attic at all costs. I've tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there's no such thing as the shadowy figure I saw. But deep down, I know the truth. He's still up there, waiting, watching. And every now and then, when the house is quiet, I hear the faintest thump from the attic, reminding me that I'm never truly alone. It was supposed to be a weekend of solitude, a chance to unwind and escape the chaos of city life. My friend Sam had graciously offered me his family's old country house, a charming, secluded cottage nestled in the woods. I arrived on a Friday evening, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The first night was peaceful. I enjoyed a glass of wine on the porch, listening to the sounds of nature. As I settled into bed, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. But that serenity was shattered in the early hours of the morning. I woke to the sound of whispering. It was faint at first, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. I brushed it off as my imagination and tried to go back to sleep. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably sinister. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, surrounding me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. There was nothing there, just the old, peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture. But the whispers continued, relentless. I bolted out of bed and rushed to the living room, hoping the noise wouldn't follow me. But as soon as I entered the room, I realized it was everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor seemed to be alive with murmurs. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was terribly wrong with this house. I tried to drown out the noise with music, but it only seemed to agitate the whispers, making them louder and more chaotic. Desperate, I called Sam, my voice trembling as I recounted what was happening. He was skeptical at first, but when he heard the panic in my voice, he agreed to come over the next day. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, the whispers never ceasing. When Sam arrived in the morning, the whispers had subsided, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. He looked around, skeptical but concerned. We checked every room, every corner, but found nothing unusual. As the day wore on, I began to doubt my sanity. Maybe it had all been a vivid nightmare. But as the sun set, the whispers returned, louder and more menacing than before. Sam heard them too this time, his face pale with fear. We decided to leave the house immediately. We drove to the nearest town and spent the night in a motel. Sam called his parents the next day, and they told him something that sent shivers down our spines. Years ago, the house had belonged to a recluse who was rumored to dabble in dark arts. He was found dead under mysterious circumstances, and since then, strange occurrences had plagued the house. We never went back. Sam's family sold the property, and I vowed to never stay in an old house alone again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those whispers, faint and distant, reminding me of that terrifying weekend in the country. I had always been a skeptic, dismissing ghost stories and paranormal tales as figments of overactive imaginations. But one night alone in my new house changed everything. I had moved into a charming, century-old Victorian house a few months prior. It had a spacious basement that I planned to convert into a home office. But every time I went down there, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. The air was always colder, and the shadows seemed to cling to the walls like a dark, oppressive presence. One stormy night, I decided to tackle the basement, determined to conquer my irrational fear. I brought down boxes of books and supplies, setting up a makeshift workstation. The rain pounded against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. As I worked, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. I paused, listening intently. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from the far corner of the basement. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Just a stack of old crates and an ancient, dust-covered mirror. I shook my head, blaming the storm for playing tricks on my mind, and went back to work. But the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I stood up, my heart pounding, and walked towards the mirror. As I approached, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence. I stared at my reflection, illuminated by the dim light of the bulb overhead. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadowy figure, standing just behind me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I spun around, but the basement was empty. My reflection in the mirror, however, told a different story. The figure was still there, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. I stumbled backward, knocking over a crate. The mirror shattered, and the figure vanished. I raced upstairs, my heart pounding, and locked the basement door behind me. I could still hear the tapping, now accompanied by faint, mocking laughter. I called my friend Mark, who had always been fascinated by the paranormal, and he agreed to come over the next day. Mark arrived with an array of equipment, eager to investigate. We ventured into the basement together, the broken mirror lying in shards on the floor. As Mark set up his cameras and EMF detectors, the tapping started again. He recorded the sound, his excitement palpable. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and a gust of icy wind blew through the basement. The shadowy figure appeared again, this time visible to both of us. Mark's equipment went haywire, the detectors beeping frantically. The figure moved closer, its eyes locking onto mine. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if I was being pulled into a dark void. Mark shouted for me to get out, and we bolted up the stairs. We slammed the door shut, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Mark reviewed the footage later, and though the figure appeared briefly on camera, the rest of the recordings were filled with static and distorted audio. We contacted a local paranormal expert, who performed a cleansing ritual on the house. The activity subsided, but I never set foot in the basement again. I sold the house a few months later, and moved to a modern apartment with no dark corners or creepy basements. But the memory of that night haunts me still, a constant reminder that some things are beyond explanation.